Previously on Yu-Gi-Oh!
Draw your last pathetic card so I can end this, Yugi.
My grandpa's deck has no pathetic cards, Kaiba. But it does contain the unstoppable...
And Painter Storming can stay banned. That's fine with me.
Yeah. We're gonna go into a little more about what cards we think are ban-worthy that are not on the ban list, or what cards are unban-worthy. But Painter's Servant was one that Blake brought up that, like, yeah, why is this card banned? And I was like, I guess maybe, I don't know, Grindstone, or, you know, you got Iona, and that kind of locks you out of your deck if you're playing against that. But if you have Ugin the Spirit Dragon, you can use his -X ability for almost a 0 Armageddon every turn that then definitely locks out all of your other opponents.
Yeah.
And this is one of those cards that creates degenerate game states. I was kind of like 50-50, but now I'm more like, let's keep this card banned. I think this is one card that enables too many of these 2-card combos where it's like, if you get rid of this card, then nothing is going to be, like, lost from the game, I guess.
I mean, I was just wanting to put it in my Una deck where, like, I declared a certain color and then, like, they exiled a certain number of cards and I would guarantee get a certain number of, like, flying 1/1 fairy rogue creature tokens. And so I was thinking about it very casually, but as soon as Guy pointed out to me, like, how many 2-card combos and degenerate things you can do with it, I'm like, it should stay banned.
Right.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And to conclude our section about what we consider to be ban-worthy cards, I just want to make a quick note that using these 2 criteria, like, this is why people may hate or call for banning of mass land destruction or stacks effects. They can create degenerate game states, but in my opinion, they are viable win strategies in their own that occur mid to late game. And mid to late game, opponents can respond adequately with cards, but all the cards we've previously mentioned up until now are banned because they can be done so early in the game, or they have little to no time for responses to occur to be stopped. And so for every person who complains about mass land destruction and stacks effects, just grow up, I don't know.
To kind of conclude also this, going through each or most of the cards and kind of where they fall, but it is interesting to note that no planeswalkers have been banned on the list yet.
I mean, that's an entire different discussion as to whether planeswalkers are any good in EDH or not. Like, we're probably going to do an episode on that all on its own, but yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, Guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now we're going to kind of go into the cards that we deem either ban or unban worthy. These are cards that completely in mine and Blake's opinion about, they're not mentioned on this list, but we think either they should be on the list, even though this is a casual format, and we're very much like, oh, well, it's kind of like, do whatever you want, or these are cards that are like, well, I don't see why this card is actually that powerful. So to start us off, I have a card very dear and near to my heart. I'm all for degenerate cards. Like, that's what I live for. But I would admit that this card, and I would be willing to give her up if she were to be considered banned, because I know how powerful she is. But I own a Shield of Emeria, which is a card that shuts down a single color in your decks, because when you play her, it's like, okay, I'm playing just green. Well, I'm going to declare green, and now green cards are not allowed to be played. So she shuts down a single card, and she shuts down a single color, and she pairs so well with Painter's Servant that it just becomes like, no matter what card you're going to play, it's too easy of a lockout. And I don't think banning her, you would lose anything from the game. Like, there's no, because otherwise it would become an unfair environment to beat up against one person. And so taking her out of the game, I don't think creates like a quote-unquote degenerate game state, but it just kind of allows a little more flexibility, because then it really becomes, so if you declare white or black, two of the best colors for removal, you don't have any kind of responses to her.
Yeah, and on the note of like Iona plus Painter Servant, I definitely think that they correctly banned Painter Servant instead of Iona.
Right. I think because there is two ban lists for Commander and Dual Commander being the one-on-one version. Iona could definitely be considered much more ban-worthy for a one-on-one, because especially if you are playing against a single monocolored deck, which is all the decks that I've ever built in my life so far. But if you play up against her, definitely banned.
I'm still waiting for you to build a two-color deck, you single fuck.
Whatever. Moving on to my next card, Mystics of the Magnus. So the main issue I see with this card is that when you cast this card and you are using its effect, the experience counters you gain do not go away when she leaves the field. And so, especially if she is your commander, then this is very easily accessible, and you have a lot of cards that are kind of like playing to that advantage when you're then able to recast her. And to quote the Josh Lee Kwai from the command zone, you would almost need to build a deck that specifically beats a Mystics of the Magnus deck. And I know that's not necessarily the best reason for banning a card, but I think that the fact that, like Iona, where this effect is too easily accessible, and especially if these experience counters aren't going away, then boom, you kind of put them with the cards that are kind of degenerate.
I can see what you're saying, Guy, because like Eminence, with experience counters, there's no real way to really get rid of them or interact with them, and we'll probably talk about that in another episode, but there's just no way to stop them once they're going. And I think in that same episode he was like, the deck is an 8 out of 10, and I will say there are decks that are like definitely 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10. That I'm referring, of course, to like CEDH players and the CEDH like sub format, kind of, where the goal is to build as like win as soon as possible, highly competitive mindset. And I think those decks specifically could stop Mystics, because in that episode that you're referring to, he said that if you just kill Mystics 1 or 2 times, then that drastically hinders the deck. And I think in like CDH decks that are highly competitive, that's possible. But I do see what you're saying. The experience counters are like Eminence, where there's just no way to interact with them and stop them from going off. And it is an incredible deck, an 8 out of 10, and I'm just not entirely sure. I'm not sure it counts as like Leovold or the other legendary creatures that we put on the ban list.
I almost want to think of it more as Planeswalker emblems. Even though Planeswalker emblems are a lot harder to get to, there's no way to interact with them. There's no way to interact with them. Like, once they're there, they're there. And it kind of becomes like I mean, I think the only way that you could get rid of experience counters is with Karn Liberated, because Karn Liberated still can't deal with emblems, but I think he would deal with these experience counters, and I think that's the only way that you're going to be able to get rid of that.
Well, that's because Karn Liberated restarts the fucking game.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. It's like, but I mean, Karn Liberated is still not going to get rid of emblems, but like, it's still going to be able to get rid of these experience counters, more or less.
I guess, yeah.
But see, if that's the only way to get rid of experience counters, if Karn Liberated's effect to restart the game, then it's kind of like, okay, why have them? We don't have to agree. We don't have to agree. Anyway, so I'm going to move on to my next card. Mishras Workshop. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there is no other land that'll just give you 3 mana for free, with the exception of like Gaia's Cradle and Tolarian Academy, because those are more like condition, because you need like either X amount of artifacts on the field, X number of creatures, whatever, but you can only use them to cast artifacts. But if you build your deck around like artifacts and you have this card, you're gonna throw yourself way ahead of the field. This card's also like thousands of dollars, and I see it to be very similar to the Moxes, so I don't see why this card isn't unbanned, other than the fact that, I don't know, because if it is like very much expensive, what's the point of not banning it? What's the point of banning it? Because yeah, not a lot of people are going to have access to this card, so I don't think anything would be lost if this card were to be banned.
Yeah, like, I kind of forgot to ask my friend who, again, runs the colorless Kozilek deck if he'd run this card as a land, but I'm pretty sure he said he would say he would, and as it's not as expensive as like the Power 9 but I still kind of agree with you, Guy. I still feel like it's way out of the average person's price range, and the fact that it generates encouraging proxying, and it's generating just like
3 mana.
Arguably too much mana, potentially turn 1. It's like I can see this card possibly becoming banned. I don't know if it is, but I can see it becoming banned.
Because like you can play this, and then you can play Soul Ring, you could play Grim Monolith, and then you could also play, I don't know, Mana Crypt on top. You could play Mana Vault using the mana that's accessible, but you could also play like Mana Vault or like Mana Crypt, and then boom, you could probably get to like 7 or 8 generic mana just with this card.
Yeah. And it is much more powerful than, I think, arguably it's much more powerful than Metalworker, which we're going to discuss a little bit later in a couple minutes. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, which was banned at one point. So, again, like, I can envision this being banned. Yeah, it's one of those cards that's kind of on the line, man. Yeah.
Yeah. So, to go into my list of cards that I would unban, and Blake kind of talked about this a little, but Worldfire and Sway of Stars. These are 2 cards that, yes, they are good, and I can see why they are banned for the reason of, quote unquote, not fun, and they start a new game. But I have been in a few situations where my opponent has gone into 100 life from like a Johnny's Ultimate, and now it definitely becomes this game of arch enemy. And so these cards become a last resort when players have no other solution, especially in late game. And I think for the high cost of Sway of Stars and Worldfire, it's not too, like, absurd. And if one opponent does kind of reach that crazy amount of life, what else are they supposed to do? And, okay, if one of them were to be unbanned between the two, Worldfire. Because red is definitely the color that doesn't ramp the best. And so this card would definitely be kind of like the red player gets one last chance. Exiles all permanents. And the reasons why I didn't include Upheaval in Shahrazad, I don't know how to pronounce that card.
Scheherazade.
Whatever. But Upheaval also then, that's gonna like take all the lands away, where then all the permanents still stand, and that can just be like, oh, someone else has like all these creatures, they're still able to attack. So I feel like that just kind of like slows everyone down. That card should still probably stay banned. And I would also like to say that the one card I can't pronounce, Scheherazade. Scheherazade. Like, that's like Inception.
Guy is in
where
kindergarten, he can't pronounce things, I'm sorry.
Shut the fuck up, you bitch. That's like that's like Inception, where you're starting a new game within the game. Where I definitely don't think that card Scheherazade is like, no. Get rid of that card. Worldfire and Sway of Stars, because at least those puts you on like even playing grounds with everyone else, especially in late game. What do you got to say, Blake?
I mean, kind of like I said, where I played with Worldfire, and it's, I don't know, just start another game at that point, man. But like, I haven't played with Sway of the Stars. I'd honestly kind of like to, in order to like give an opinion. I think that would be a cool like episode idea, like to eventually have played against all of the banned cards and then do like a revision episode and do what our thoughts are. But we'll do that in the future. I haven't played against Sway of the Stars, but I imagine it's gonna be the exact same thing, where just restart another game, man. Like, I mean, to be fair, it is like a high CMC spell, but just restart another game. I don't know.
I think also the thing with Worldfire is that it kind of then becomes like this game of like, it really is last second, like, oh my god, what am I gonna do?
It's the final countdown.
It really is. Exactly that, where you're kind of like, oh my god, it's like nuclear explosion, and everyone's kind of just like in this daze, and they're like, what am I gonna do? And it's like, who can quickly play like a...
Can I draw the card? Can I kill him? Yes! Oh!
Blake just perfectly imagined that. So I think that kind of allows for Sway of the Stars and Worldfire to be unbanned, is because there are these final countdown moments where, what am I gonna do? The last card that I would like to see unbanned is Gifts Ungiven, because I really, really, really just want to play with it. It's a good card. I see why it's banned. Like, this is for my selfish reasons. I'm going to hell. I just want this card unbanned. That's it.
I haven't played against this card, but I want to, and see just like what can be done.
You and I can play with it and see what happens.
Well, yeah, because you bought it, you piece of shit.
Okay. Well, whatever.
All right. So we're gonna move on to my ban/unban list, which is vastly superior because of arbitrary reasons.
Okay. Fuck you.
Yeah. So I would ban what's considered fast artifact mana. And I'm talking about Mox Diamond, Mox Opal, Chrome Mox, Lotus Petal, Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, and Grim Monolith. So all these spells can be cast far faster than what's like designated as like cast on curve. So like you're generating more mana than what they cost, is what I'm saying. So it directly enables most of the turn 1, 2, or 3 EDH wins. And I think this is one step into the core of the issue, which is like I'm pretty sure like most EDH players, I don't want to lose before turn 3. And if you allow these fast artifact mana cards to be legal, I think that's part of what allows them to end turn 1, 2, or 3. Now I realize in saying that the CEDH community is probably going to fucking hate me, and they can come after me all they want, but I'm going to stick with my guns, and I'm going to say I'd rather have these cards banned than some other cards that are high CMC that are enabled because of these cards.
The ones, I think a lot of these do kind of enable those turn 1 wins. The one that I would probably take off of this list is Grim Monolith, only for the fact that I think that the fact that you would maybe be able to counter it real quick, and that would then mean you need more mana to untap it than what's available to you, kind of balances it more than any of the others. But definitely like Mox Diamond, Mox Opal, Chrome Mox, and Lotus Petal. Soul Ring we know is never going to be unbanned because of how much Wizards like to suck its dick. Mana Crypt could potentially be unbanned because of how high cost of it is, but these cards are expensive. Grim Monolith being the only one that's like semi-balanced.
I do want to say that we did kind of, I personally drew the line, an arbitrary line, where I determined in a spectrum, like there's Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, Soul Ring, Dimir Monolith, and Basalt Monolith. And I chose to draw the arbitrary line between Grim Monolith and Basalt Monolith, because Basalt Monolith is 3 for 3. It costs 3 mana and generates 3 mana, and Grim Monolith costs 2 and can generate 3, so it's a net positive. And that's why I arbitrarily drew the line, and I'm glad, Guy, you called me out on it, because it's like, yes, it is an arbitrary line, and that's where I personally chose to draw it. And I see what you're saying, where it's like Grim Monolith costs 2, that's the same as Counterspell, which costs 2 blue mana, and then you have to recover from that. But I mean, I would still stick with my statement. I would still ban all the 0 CMC artifacts, all the 1. I'd still ban Soul Ring and Mana Vault and Grim Monolith. And I have no regrets. # no regrets.
No regrets. I mean, no, I definitely see what you're saying. But I of your list, that's the only one that I'm kind of like, that's where I would kind of draw the line. I think that one is the most balanced of the 7 or 8 that you mentioned. But again, we don't have to agree on everything. So we'll just accept that I'm right. Let's move on.
Yeah. So the next ban cards I want to see are low CMC tutors. And again, most of you are going to probably be pissed at me, but I don't fucking care because I'm drunk, so whatever. I want to ban Mystical Tutor. I want to ban Worldly Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, Demonic Tutor, Sylvan Tutor, Imperial Seal. I want to ban all the tutors that are 1 or 2 CMC. Because the low CMC tutors plus fast artifact mana are what enable 99% of CEDH. And CEDH players, feel free to comment in the comments below about how fucking wrong I am, but I bet you can't because I'm right, so fight me IRL. Yeah, so between fast mana, artifact mana, plus low CMC tutors, that's what really enables the degenerate consistency of turn 1, 2, or 3 EDH wins. And those are the two main categories I want to ban. Yeah. And I do want to quickly say that I don't want to ban every single tutor. I don't want to ban every single tutor because I'm all about those jank decks that need every single tutor that they can get. I just want to run tutors that are 3 CMC, 4 CMC, 5 CMC, etc., etc. I just don't want the 1 CMC to be like, or 2 CMC tutors to be like necessary. And because I want to play my Phage the Untouchable deck, and that relies on every single possible black tutor there exists. But it's like I don't need 1 CMC or 2 CMC tutors to do so. Like,
why do you hate the 1%?
What was that?
Why do you hate the 1%?
Why do I hate the 1%? Oh, fuck off.
It's funny because they're like 1 CMC cards. And they're also very expensive, so like the 1% is the only ones who are going to be able to afford them.
It's because I can't. It's also because I can't afford them. It's like Imperial Seal is like I think about $300 to $400. If you seriously run those, I'm seriously gonna if I'm going to an LGS and I see someone play Imperial Seal, I'm immediately gonna look over them and be like, this motherfucker has money. This motherfucker can, like, afford to buy the ridiculous OP bullshit and probably has a good-ass deck. I mean, notice that I said the word probably. That doesn't mean that they do have. It just means they probably have. So I'm going to go after that piece of shit probably every single time. The next card I want to say to unban is Balance, because it's powerful, but it's not really a hard reset like other banned cards are. They're not really early stacks pieces. It's a sorcery. It's not an enchantment. It doesn't stay on the board. Like I said, Wizards of the Coast recently reprinted Magus of the Balance, which is nice and definitely balanced. It's like the Magus I don't even fucking care about because it's so fucking weak. What do you think, Guy?
Well, I don't see how this is any more less broken than, let's say, Armageddon. Like, I get you can cast this card much earlier, but also, like, if you're able to cast Armageddon, because, like, Balance is only good if you're really playing it as, like, late game. And if you're playing Armageddon late game in some decks, then yeah, that's definitely going to put a much bigger dent into some people than, like, Armageddon would, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, even as the sorcery, I think it's fine. You guys can tell me again in the comments, totally bitch at me and tell me, Blake, you're a fucking idiot. What the fuck are you thinking? You're a piece of crap. Like, Balance is so OP. Like, there's a reason that it's not unbanned, and I mean, I'm saying this super sarcastically, but, like, there might actually be a reason, and I honestly want to hear the response. Like, I honestly do. So, leave your comments in the sections below, and we'll move on.
I'm going to get on my personal YouTube account and write specifically that comment that, Blake, you're a fucking idiot. Balance is so OP. Yeah.
Anyways, so, okay, now that I'm reading this note, I don't really want to say it, but I'm still going to say it. I said unban Painter Servant. Yeah, it's busted with Iona, and as between the whole notes making process and actually making this episode, I feel like I have done a kind of a 180 where it's like, yeah, maybe Painter Servant should be banned because it enables too many 2-card combos. Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to stand by my statement that I think it should stay banned.
Alright, then we'll move on. Okay, so I would unban maybe high CMC creatures. So I'm talking about Prophet of Crufex, Sylvan Primordial, Primeval Titan, and Sundering Titan. And all these are on the edge. I can see why all of these are currently banned. I think the only situation in which I would unban these is if your playgroup is okay. Like if your playgroup is okay with it. If your playgroup is highly competitive. If your playgroup is like, say, a level 6 or below, do not play these cards. Again, it's all up to you. Do whatever the fuck you want. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that these cards can be more okay in casual, but when it gets to that competitive game, these cards should not necessarily be. I think there's kind of like a. I think this is like mid-game, not mid-game, mid-level cards that, yeah, these cards should not be in here. Maybe like if they were in like the lower level, yeah, but I also don't see these cards being like turn 2, 3, 4 enabler wins.
Yeah, it all kind of depends on your meta. If your meta is like literally on the cusp of turning into CEDH, then yeah, play Prophet of Crufex, Sylvan Primordial, Primeval Titan, and Sundering Titan. Go for it. But like if your meta group is like a 5 out of 10 or less, do not play these cards under any circumstance. Holy shit. The next category of unbanning cards I want to say is to some of the legendary creatures to be allowed in the 99. So I recognize how absurd this idea is, and the main reason most of these creatures are banned are because they can be commanders, and all I'm saying is let them just be in the 99. It's fine. As long as you ban low CMC tutors and early artifact mana, as I described in the last 30 minutes, you can. It's kind of a trade-off. Like, get rid of low CMC artifacts and low CMC tutors and allow these commanders to be played. I feel like that's an even trade, and I don't know. It's all a huge big mess, and God, what do you think?
So I would like to say that the only reason that these cards are banned is because there was originally this list of banned as commander and banned in the 99, and when it came down to the Magic online forums, it was peer pressured into turning this into one list. So some of those cards were spared, but then some of them were still deemed as bannable. So being Leovold, Rezelbrand, Kraitz, Cabal, the Braids card, I don't know her name, whatever. But so some of these cards are still considered
Braids Cabal minion.
Yeah, Braids Cabal minion. Still considered ban-worthy in both being a commander and banned in the 99. Kind of going back a little to the... I could see that some of these unbanning the high CMC creatures. It's nice to note that these cards aren't... None of these cards are legendary. So you couldn't use them as the commander and then like re-abuse their effects. But like some of these cards that we've just mentioned here, you could definitely like re-abuse their effects. But they're not... I don't know. I think the fact that they kind of gave in to the fact that they turned this into one ban list allowed for more stagnant and like, if these cards were put in the 99, I definitely don't think they'd be as powerful. Grizzlebrand,
Right.
no. Leovold, definitely not. Braids Cabal, Minion, not really. Emrakul, I think, is still the only one that I would say no. But I don't think any of them are like. If you were to put them in the 99 and not as your commander, I think they'd all be fine.
So, would you kind of agree with my statement where it's like I would allow some of the legendary creatures to be unbanned if they banned early artifact mana and low CMC tutors, or do you disagree with that?
I do think I would still agree with. I think I would agree with the fact that if you were to ban low CMC artifact ramp, you could then also kind of keep them as the 99. But I would still rather see them probably just played in the 99 rather than your commander as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's my preference, but I also think that if you were to do what you've suggested, that it would still be okay if you were to unban them and only keep them in the 99.
Okay, that's fair enough. I would like to say that there's plenty of other ban-worthy cards that other people have proposed. I'm sure you'll probably say a bunch in the comments down below. But these are just the ones that Guy and I have thought of, and we're honestly like not going to talk about every single one because we'd be here for probably 3 days instead of 3 hours. So we are going to move on to like kind of the end of our category, which is previously banned cards, and there's only 3 that we have on this list. Let us know if we actually missed any, because there's a decent chance that we did miss some. So previously banned cards are Protean Hulk, Metalworker, and Koku Show the Evening Star. And starting off, we have Protean Hulk, which was the most recent unbanning, and it is currently, I should say, in the most competitive EDH deck, nicknamed Breakfast Hulk or Flash Hulk. Yeah, I don't really know what to say about that other than the fact that it got unbanned, and it's used in the #1 EDH deck, Thrasios Tymna partner deck, where you just win on an average of 2.83, I think. Like, on turn, average 2.83, you just win the game. That's fun. I totally don't miss Yu-Gi-Oh! Where you totally lost turn 1 or 2. Sorry, I had something stuck in my throat. Yeah. We have Metalworker, which was banned, and I've seen it in play. I play it against every Kozilek the Great Distortion commander deck I play against. And I just want to say I have seen a Kozilek the Great Distortion commander with a Lightning Greaves or Squidfoot Boots turn 3 because of Metalworker, and it's fucking terrifying because it has Menace, and you just get killed. I mean, you get hit turn 3, and then the next turn you get hit turn 4, and then you're dead. And then you just kind of watch them control, like pseudo control the game for the rest of the game and then win. And it's really, really fucking savage. That's all I'm gonna fucking say about that.
I haven't personally played against any of these unbanned cards, but I think between these two, I'm kind of like, some of these cards that were banned are definitely more ban-worthy or unban-worthy than some of these previously mentioned cards, Protean Hulk and Metalworker. But I think Koku Show the Evening Star, I think that's probably the card of the 3 that we know that have been unbanned is the most reasonable, because it was a card that could be used as your commander. And people were scared that, like, oh, since it's going to drain everyone for 5 and then the one person is going to gain 5, that they were like, oh, that's way too strong. But now people are like, but is it? So yeah, this card, I think, of the 3 that have been unbanned, it's the most unbanworthy.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's like people thought it was gonna be way more abusable than they thought it was gonna be. So Koku Show the Evening Star isn't even a problem at all. Like, people see Koku Show and they're just like, oh, okay, they're gonna gain like 15 life, whatever. I don't fucking care.
So yeah. I think there's obviously one solution that we can do for this kind of dilemma that we're seeing with the ban list. Wouldn't you agree, Blake?
Yeah. And
that's create 2 ban lists.
That's one alternative. Like, there's in all of EDH, there's like 3 possible scenarios. Either there's no ban list, there are 2 ban lists, or there are additional rules added onto it.
Yeah, so we're going into kind of the possible alternatives where we could eradicate either the ban list or kind of help mediate this ban list a little more. And a solution that I personally came up with is that you need to create a better ban list between EDH and competitive EDH. And the allowing for these 2 lists and having competitive EDH, which would be more sanctioned events, would allow for a much more competitive gameplay, which would allow for, you know, these turn 1, 2, 3 wins, and this would allow then for players to get through games faster and play their decks not in like 1 hour settings, but they're able to play more games much quicker. And there are only, I want to say, 16 cards that I would still consider to be on the ban list from the original 64, and that's the 8 of the Power 9 that were included, so not including Time Twister, Chaos Orb, Channel, Emrakul, Falling Star, Caracas, Limited Resources, Shahrazad, and Timeful. Some of the reasons why I took off some of those other cards were because, like Upheaval or Sway of the Stars, they are not fast enough, I think, for competitive EDH gameplay. And because they would quote unquote start a new game, they're not doing you any kind of like they're not kind of doing you any advantage that would like allow you to get yourself ahead of the game. So also, by having a much smaller ban list, you are becoming a smarter player by having to worry about and consider many more threats. And so Blake once gave me this analogy of your deck becoming a quote unquote fine-tuned sword, and that means, like, you know, you're considering all threats to which your deck has to like go up against. But I think if you build your deck correct enough, you're going to be able to at least get into that. You're not going to get into that as much, because you're going to be going at such a pace that you're not going to care so much about other threats, because you know by turn 2 or 3 you're going to be able to win. And I find that to be quote not necessarily balanced, because, you know, some of these cards are so overpowered, but these cards are still enabling you to get through games quicker, and then your opponents are like, oh, okay, start a new game, and you're doing this situation of like, okay, well, whose deck really is stronger, and you're able to play many more games much quicker.
Yeah. I guess it's just like in my experience, it's like EDH is just a format. There's no distinguish between CEDH and EDH. You can always create a deck that's between the spectrum of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm not sure you can really evenly divide the format into what's called CEDH and EDH. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit tipsy. EDH.
Well, here's, in my opinion, it's similar to Yu-Gi-Oh! How you go into a tournament and you just play your deck, and you know, competitive EDH would be you have any card at your disposal except the 16 that I've mentioned, and you're going into your deck, and whether or not you've built your deck to be as strong to that capacity, you're not going to necessarily do as well against some of your opponents. Though now that I'm saying this, I do also see that if we were to unban a lot of these cards, some of them may go up way in price, and then now it does become kind of this monetary problem that kind of enables whoever has the most money is going to be the one who's going to win the most.
Like when you go to an LGS and like you play for wins, like there's a cash prize or a certain number of booster packs on the line, you're going to play your most powerful deck, and whoever plays their most powerful deck is going to win usually. And it's just like, it's also kind of pay to win, and I don't necessarily like that.
Right. And so now that, I mean, talking about this, I'm kind of more like 50-50 of whether or not I would actually want to see a ban list for casual gameplay and a ban list for competitive, because I do believe that two different ban lists can exist, kind of how there's two different ban lists for dual commander one-on-one versus commander being the multi-format. But so I do think that there can be a world where they exist together, but I don't know if we live in a world where that's actually possible. Yeah. Or if we just need to think about that like a lot harder than how we are right now.
The way EDH is, there's only like 3 states that EDH can work in. There's a ban list, there's 2 ban lists, or multiple ban lists, or there's no ban list whatsoever. And so currently we live in a world where there is one ban list. Guy and I have just talked about how like there's not really possible to create 2 ban lists because the arbitrary definition between CEDH and EDH is arbitrary. You can fight us all you want about that. It is arbitrary. It just is. Like, the only distinguishing factor is you want to win as soon as possible versus I just want to have fun. That's the only distinguishing factor. The other factor is that there is just no ban list whatsoever. So what does EDH look like if there is no ban list? You have to kind of create rules. And so Guy and I kind of found an article about Commander if there were no EDH ban list. And we're going to read the 6 rules that the person proposed. And I want you to hear them, but I also want you to like calm the fuck down, because they recognize the fact that their rules are not well thought out, and it's really more of just a conversation to start going. So before you start typing away in the comments that their rules are BS and they don't know the fundamentals of EDH, just calm down. Just realize that they're trying to start a conversation. We will link their article in the video description, and just calm the fuck down. Okay, so now that I've given that incredibly long preface, let us begin. So Commander games are meant to encourage a fun social environment. That said, the following rules are in effect in a Commander game unless your playgroup decides not to use them ahead of time. Number 1. Players can't take extra turns. Number 2. State-based actions that would cause a player to lose the game do not occur unless it is that player's end step. Number 3. Whenever a player would search a player's library, that player searches the top 20 cards of that library instead. Number 4. Whenever a player has access to infinite mana, i.e. a series of actions that can be repeated any number of times, that player may only perform that action a maximum times per turn. Number 5. If a player would begin a turn, that player may skip that turn. If that player does, he or she may either search his or her library for a basic land card and put into battlefield tapped, or exile any one permanent. Number 6. Players may not spend more mana in one turn than the total number of lands controlled by all opponents. So at this point, Guy and I have put all 6 steps in front of you, and it's probably a lot to process. So just like take a moment and like read through them. You're probably gonna have your opinions, and now here we go.
Moment's over, bitches.
Go ahead, Guy.
Well, here's. So I think that these are a definite good first draft of rules. I think that they are a stepping stone, not necessarily in the 100% right direction, but I think that these could then lead to the rules that could ultimately affect the format of Commander. One of the main problems, and I'll use number 1 as an example, is that players can't take extra turns. And so the author, as we were reading through this, mentioned that, it's possible that then playgroups may say, oh, we're actually going to not use that rule. Well, let's say you're playing and you go to a new playgroup and you didn't know that this playgroup was going to use extra turns. You show up and you have no way of being able to combat that. So you have 3-4 other people taking extra turns every other turn, and you're like, oh my god, how am I supposed to keep up with this? So, you can either eliminate cards that have no value, which are the cards that give you this extra turn, or you're giving you these cards that give you this super good effect. And if you're not prepared to be able to play with both of those, then your deck is either going to thrive or your deck is going to suffer. Because maybe then that's how you're going to win, or maybe that's how you're not going to win because you're not going to be able to take extra turns because you weren't thinking like, hey, I'm going to play in a group that allows me to play with extra turns.
Yeah, and the only thing I really have to say against this first rule is that I think taking extra turns is viable. As controversial as it is, like, I believe that Nar set decks taking as many extra turns to deal commander combat damage, and as many turns as necessary to deal damage to other opponents, I still feel like that is an important part of EDH. I still feel like that is a important mechanic in which to express diversity amongst different playstyles. The playstyle of taking extra turns and dealing combat damage, I still feel is a very viable EDH playstyle. What do you think of that?
No, I agree, because it's almost like going back to mass land destruction, or if built correctly, these are strategies that could win you the game, and taking away these effects that are from perfectly good and accessible cards kind of, and then giving the ability of, oh, maybe we'll play with this, maybe we won't, kind of limits that. So it's almost as if you can't necessarily just eliminate a whole card type without the idea of thinking about whether or not, this either has to be banned. You have to think of it in a much broader perspective than just this.
Yeah. So moving on to number 2, where it says state-based actions that would cause a player to lose the game do not occur until it is that player's end step. The problem I have with this rule is that sometimes player removal is the only answer. Sometimes when you're staring your opponent down the face and they have an unbeatable board, the only answer is to fucking kill the shit out of them by having them go to like 0 life or some shit. And that's honestly the only answer your deck has, is to put them at 0 life and they die, because you don't know what the permanents they have on the battlefield, and you can't deal with that. And I feel like that is a very viable thing, player removal is permanent removal.
I think, to give kind of an example, if we weren't playing without the ban list and we were playing with this rule, I think this kind of goes into the biorhythm or coalition victory, where I kind of understand where this person was coming from with these rules. And let's say they were playing biorhythm and you got 3 other people who have no other kind of creatures on the board, so they're automatically going to lose. So this is giving them one last turn to see if they're able to counter or do something about this. Where, like, I know that, like, you could eliminate maybe 3, 4, or however many people you're playing with. You could eliminate them right then and there. This isn't single targeting someone. This is like mass player, not like land destruction and creature destruction. This is mass player removal, and you're trying to like say, okay, everyone's got 1 turn to see if they can do something.
Yeah, and for number 3, it says whenever a player would search a player's library, that player searches the top 20 cards of that player's library instead. I don't agree with that. I'd much rather have a ban list where it says you can't play 1 CMC or 2 CMC Tutors instead of this rule. What do you think of that, guy?
Say that again.
So the rule number 3 says whenever a player would search a player's library, that player searches the top 20 cards of that library instead. So I'm thinking of like my Phage deck, where I just want to like search a certain specific card at a certain step in the game, and if I can't search that certain card, I just lose, because my deck is a jank deck. It's a jank deck straight up. And that's great. I love playing jank decks. I think that's one of the best parts about EDH, is playing jank decks and still having some viability. But the problem is, like, when you have 1 CMC or 2 CMC tutors that like enable that way too much and allow for turn 1, 2, or 3 kills.
I think this is one of those rules that I think would be okay whether or not it was optional. I think giving this 20 card search limit, saying like yes, no, like yeah, then that does really limit some of your cards, and especially if you're new, then you're like, oh well shoot, these cards aren't going to do nearly as well as I thought. But I think that this is one of those rules where it's like it could kind of work. Or to give an example, I think that maybe exiling like low CMC tutors instead of putting them into your graveyard would also be a good way of being able to counteract or balance those cards.
Yeah, I guess. Number 4 is whenever a player has access to an infinite loop, i.e. series of actions that can be repeated in any number of times, that player may only perform those actions a maximum times per turn. So, say you have access to an infinite loop, you can only do it a fixed number of times. So, the LGS that I go to limits it to 5 times per turn, which honestly kind of helps the game actually last past turn 4, and I'm kind of okay with. I mean, it kind of depends, because if you do an infinite loop turn 15, nobody gives a crap, because the game's gone on so fucking long. It's probably been 2.5 hours. Who fucking cares? But if you do an infinite loop like turn 3, 2, or 1, like, yeah, I'm gonna call you out on your shit. Like, I don't want that to happen.
Because, right, these are, again, these aren't the rules that we think are the defining let's make Commander great again, but these are the rules, these are like kind of foundations of how we think, you know, they could lead to making Commander a much more balanced game. And I think that cutting off people from infinite loops has this repercussion of, well, if you're gonna say that, it has to be like, well, okay, we're gonna have, you can have an infinite loop after turn 6. Excuse me. You can have an infinite loop after turn 6. That way you're not winning by turn 4.
Yeah. Moving on to rule 5, if a player would begin a turn, that player may skip that turn. If that player does, he or she may either search his or her library for a basic land card, or put in it onto the battlefield tapped, or exile any one permanent. So, like, either you can skip your turn and put a land into play, or you can skip your turn and exile any one target permanent. And I kind of see what they're saying, where they're like, if you don't have anything to do, you can, and your opponent is being some OP bullshit, you can exile their permanent, but like, I'm still not sure that it addresses the issue, which is the fact that, like, I honestly just think of like the Mindslaver lock, where you're like, you play Mindslaver and then you reoccur it turn after turn after turn, and you can play the other person's turn after turn after turn after turn. And I know a person that like could do infinite Mindslaver locks, but they choose not to because they don't think it's fun. They don't think it's worth the game. And I agree with them. I don't think it's worth the game to like play every single player's turn to a Mindslaver lock. What do you think?
I think this rule could be okay if you took out that clause of exile any one permanent, because to me, I didn't even think about that Mindslaver combo, And if you're just then able to control your one of your opponents every other turn, it's kind of like I could get the benefit of both, where I'm mind slaving someone, I'll put out a land, and then when that next person's turn comes around, I'm able to exile another permanent, and you're kind of getting these like 2-for-1, and someone else is not having fun at the expense of you then having to lead the way.
Yeah. So
I think it would be okay without the exile any other permanent.
Well, maybe. I'd have to think about that more.
Maybe.
Maybe. The very last rule we have is players may not spend more mana in one turn than the total number of lands controlled by all opponents. And at first thought, I can understand this, because it's like, okay, they want to limit the number of mana you can play each turn, and I kind of agree with that, where you don't want them to kind of win out one. You don't want them to win turn 1, 2, or 3. But at the same time, this rule backfires, where it's like players may not spend more mana in one turn than the total number of lands controlled by all opponents. Late game or even mid game, this kind of contradicts the very spirit of EDH, which is EDH is where you can do literally whatever the fuck you want. You can play the most absurd BS cards that ever exist in the world, and you can abuse the crap out of them. And that's the reason I fell in love with the EDH, is that you can play whatever card was ever created in the game, and most of them, like, notice how I said the word most of them are fucking balanced, and you can just do whatever the crap you want, and I love that so much. But rule number 6 also kind of, in its very definition, limits the heart of the format itself by making more mana than is normally allowed, by making more mana than is, like, you basically can't play big mana plays. You're not allowed to do so, and I feel like that's very counterintuitive to the very spirit that is ADH.
I agree that, I mean, the spirit of EDH is to be able to abuse some of these high CMC cards that you would probably never see played in any other format. I think maybe if you wanted to balance it by kind of this after turn 4, after turn 5 kind of thing, where you can't cast more than X amount of mana after this turn, so it kind of slows you down. That way you're still not being able to cast cards that, you know, not worth that are kind of like way above that mana ramp or mana curve. But if you're kind of playing with that limitation, it kind of makes it okay, maybe. But I think in general that this rule does kind of, I don't know, break the idea, not break, I do see that there could be a limitation, but if anything, I would rather see that this rule be eradicated, because it does kind of ruin the main spirit of EDH, which is to play those big mana spells. So, I don't know. You'd have to think of, I think this one should be, we should think about this one a little. Well, I mean, we're not the ones who came up with these rules, but this rule in particular probably kind of defiles the spirit of EDH more than any of the other rules.
Okay, so the only thing I wanted to say about this is we were reading these rules, and the original post got a lot of negative comments, and I'd argue much more negative comments than it deserves. The author clearly recognizes the fact that they didn't put as much thought into these ideas as they probably should have, and they recognize the flaws of these 6 rules, but the point wasn't to like think of thoroughly thought through ideas. The point was to like think of ideas in which is it possible to add more rules in substitution for the ban list. And that's what I'd like to see in the discussions of the video is there a way to add like 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 rules and get rid of the ban list entirely? Is that possible at all? I want to look at the bigger picture. I don't want people to be hating on each other and saying, oh, you don't know the fundamentals of the format, you don't know this, you don't know that, you're a piece of BS. Like, let's keep it civil, okay? Like, even though Guy and I are clearly drunks, like, we still want to see the world prosper and benefit from clear and reasonable discussions in the comments. Like, we're both reasonable people.
For the most part. Because otherwise I would just say, yeah, I really want to play with this card, so let's unban it. Let's fuck all the repercussions that there could be. I want to play with this card, and I'm a selfish piece of shit for wanting it. Gifts Ungiven, Leovold, Emissary of Tress. I don't think there's... I mean, I would love Ancestral Recall and Time Walk, but those cards would be way too expensive to actually include into my decks, so not worth it. So again, these certainly aren't the rules to end the ban list, but they are a good start. I think for future, Blake and I may go over like rules that we do believe could kind of counteract the ban list. But in conclusion, this is kind of a general thought to the ban list. Do whatever the fuck you want. I mean, the ban list is meant to be more of a reference guide of like, okay, if your meta isn't prepared for this, some of these cards probably are strong and should not be considered for your gameplay. Some of these cards are definitely more like can be considered quote unquote casual because they're not fast enough, but do whatever you want. That's kind of the spirit of EDH, is you get to do whatever you want in Magic.
Yeah, and I hope you've been enjoying this episode as much as Guy and I have with drinking, because we're fucking toasted. We're probably going to crash so hard after this episode. But totally like check us out on Twitter at WizardStaff101 at Twitter. And then also email us at wizardstaff101@gmail.com and comment in below, because I'm sure, because all of us do, our various opinions, and tell me how wrong I am that I should totally just ignore Sundering Titan, Primeval Titan, and Prime Time, and just like how I'm so fucking wrong, and just tell me how much of a piece of shit I am. Just please, like, I will fucking like jacuzzi bathtub the shit out of those comments.
Yeah. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you for staying through the whole 2+ hours of us commenting, and we hope to see you again real soon. Alright. Thank you.
Alright, peace out.
Peace out.